We know what you're thinking. This is another dry, boring podcast on a topic that we know nothing about. Well, I hope we'll be able to surprise you and that you'll learn lots of vocabulary connected to taxes and tariffs in this episode of
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with nearly 60 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. Well, thank you for listening to another episode. You're all very welcome, particularly new listeners. The more the merrier. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. How are you, Craig?
I'm very well, thank you, mate. I'm very excited. Well, excited is maybe not the best word to use. I'm motivated, let's say, to talk about taxes and tariffs this week and put some useful vocabulary under the microscope so that we can help the listeners understand this topic more. How are you doing?
I'm fine, I must say. I'm fine. Despite some of the strange news going around these days, let's not go into too much detail because we don't like our podcast to get too
time specific.
We like to keep them evergreen if we can. But let's just say that one of the reasons we're recording this episode is because at the time of recording, which is May 2025, it's a time where the topic of tariffs especially is very much in the news at the moment. It hadn't been for many, many years, if not decades, a big thing, but now it is very much in the news. So that's one of the reasons we're talking about it.
And before we start speaking about taxes and tariffs, we have a voice message from Jose from Asturias.
Hi guys, Jose from Asturias. First of all, thank you for your podcast. It's a powerful tool for people like me to understand and improve my English. I'm an IT engineer working in an international company at this moment, so all my colleagues are outside from Spain and English is a must. And the IT world, all the software, hardware is in English, so it's needed to improve your career and achieve good roles and positions in your career. English is a must. So for people like me that I cannot select the language that I wanted to learn, English is a must. It's not an option. Some days I hate English because, you have some mistakes in the daily, or some people don't understand you, or you make some issues on your mail, and you think, wow, English is a mess. And your podcast should be in a positive tone to learn English, but I wanted to hear some episodes in the dark way so you can learn some expressions or something like this when you have a bad day with your English learning path and you say, oof, I hate learning English. And that's all from my side. Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you very, very much for your message, Jose. It's lovely to hear from you. I really liked the expression that you used a couple of times, saying that English is a must, because that word must is very common as a modal verb. I must do this, I mustn't do that. But it's nice to hear it used as a noun. If something is a must, it's something that you feel you must do. Reza, any comments on Jose's message?
Thanks a lot, Jose, for your message. It's nice to hear from Asturias, a nice part of the world. Beautiful place. I would correct a couple of things you said, Jose. You spoke about colleagues. You said outside from Spain because you're translating Spanish, I think, and you've added an extra word. You should say outside Spain. Drop the word from. Outside Spain.
Or abroad.
Or it's just simply abroad. Yeah, that means not in this country. Another thing I think you said was some mistakes in the daily. I think you said daily, but it should be simply some mistakes in the day. Or you could say some daily mistakes. Yeah, some daily mistakes or some mistakes in the day.
And a small pronunciation point, Jose, be careful of your H sounds in words like hate, for example, you're producing that sound from the throat. So it sounds a little bit like geit. Try to imagine you're cleaning your glasses or your sunglasses, and the noise you need to make is so with no vibration from the throat, just from the mouth. Hate. I hate it. And I totally understand your frustration with English when you're not quite getting the language right and you're feeling very frustrated and angry. We have done a podcast specifically about this kind of language. It was episode 347. So, Jose, if you go to inglespodcast.com/347, you'll see lots of vocabulary connected to being angry, getting angry, and feeling really frustrated. So, Reza, let's start with this week's topic and talk about taxes and tariffs.
First of all, I want to spell the word tariff because it could be easily misspelled. In fact, it often is misspelled even by native speakers because English is a difficult language to spell. It's Tariff. That's right, 2 Fs at the end. Taxes and tariffs with a double F, then S plural. Well, let's start by talking about different types of taxes after this quotation. Do you agree with this, Craig? Only 2 things are certain in life: death and taxes.
Yes, absolutely. One thing that you know definitely is that one day you're going to die. And taxes, there have always been taxes pretty much. Even if you go back to the time of the Romans took taxes to help build their empire. So as Benjamin Franklin famously said, we can only be certain of 2 things: death and taxes. There are many different types of taxes, aren't there? One common sales tax that's used in the UK in British English is VAT. You might hear that acronym. VAT stands for Value Added Tax. It's IVA in Spanish, VAT.
Sometimes people say VAT, don't they? Sometimes they pronounce it as if it were a word. So you can say VAT or VAT.
Exactly.
Another important collocation you'll hear in the world of taxes is social security contributions, which is effectively your tax paid to the government. Social security contributions, what you must pay to the government to ensure that in the future, if you need money from them, you'll get some. In many countries, if you haven't paid social security contributions, then later, if you're unemployed, you won't get any help from the government.
And those social security contributions means that you can get healthcare in some countries. You can get a retirement pension if you've paid in your contributions, and you can get certain benefits in some countries if you have a disability or if you're a single parent family, for example. So there are many ways that the government can help you. But of course, in order to get that help, you need to pay in your social security contributions. Another kind of tax is income tax. And income is self-explanatory. It's any money that comes in to you. So the opposite of income is expenditure. That's the money you spend. And the income tax is a particular tax that is applied to the money that you earn or otherwise receive. It could be personal income tax on you as a person, or it could be corporate income tax on a business.
Capital gains tax is another important terminology. That's paid on profits from selling assets like property or stocks. Assets is spelled A-S-S-E-T and plural S, assets. So property, buildings or equipment or stocks. If you make profit as a result of those things you have been sold, you have to pay capital gains tax.
And you pay tax on property, houses, offices, flats, etc. Not only when you sell the property, but just to have the property, you have to pay tax on it. And that's called property tax or real estate tax. So you pay this every year if you own a property.
I've just paid mine in Valencia. Have you paid yours recently, Craig?
You paid yours early. I think we have until June, don't we?
That's right. I like to get it out of the way. That means to do something early so that you don't have to worry about it. I paid my IBI. That's the Spanish version.
That's right. Do you calculate everything yourself, or do you pay an accountant to do it for you?
No, I did it. Well, the town council tell you the price. There's nothing to calculate in that one. They say you owe X amount and you pay it. You don't need to work that one out.
But don't you do the declaration together with the money you've earned from working at the school?
Yeah, but I think the EB, the property tax, is completely independent of your renta, your income tax declaration.
Oh, I pay mine together. Interesting.
Well, you can, but you don't have to.
Okay, I've learned something. And there's another kind of tax, which is stamp duty. Stamp, S-T-A-M-P, stamp, like the stamp we used to put on letters years ago. Stamp duty or transfer tax. And that's where you buy or sell a property. There's tax involved. If you make money when you sell a property, you have to produce certain legal documents. And there's a certain tax implicated in buying and selling property that you also have to pay.
Another tax, which you'll hear a lot about, is inheritance tax, or it's sometimes called estate tax. So an estate is what you inherit from relatives, perhaps your parents or uncles or aunts or other people who leave you things when they die and you inherit them. Inheritance tax is a tax you must pay the government because you have inherited something because somebody died. Most countries in the world have some form of inheritance tax. Spain does, the UK does, but there are a few countries that don't. For example, Norway, Portugal, and Sweden don't have inheritance tax.
But they have a higher level of income tax, so maybe that helps to compensate.
Yeah, Norway has a very high level of income tax.
So does Sweden, most Scandinavian countries. Excise duty is another kind of tax. Remember, you can go to our website, inglespodcast.com/573 to see all of this vocabulary listed on the webpage. Excise duty is a special kind of consumption tax. When you buy alcohol, for example, or tobacco, packet of cigarettes, if you buy petrol and some luxury products, there's an extra amount of money added to those products or goods, and that's a special consumption tax. And that's one reason why a packet of cigarettes is so much more expensive in America and in the UK than it is in Spain, because the excise duty is higher in some countries on some products than it is on others.
Yes, and yet, ironically, I can't remember if it's either very low or zero tax on tobacco in Gibraltar. So the United Kingdom has fairly high tax on cigarettes, but Gibraltar, that British colony right beside Spain, has virtually no tax on tobacco, which is why a lot of people smuggle tobacco out of Gibraltar into Spain, strangely. To smuggle is to try to move a product illegally from one country to another, and it's often to do with avoiding the payment of excise duty.
I remember years ago I had friends who used to drive to Spain, buy lots of cigarettes, put them in the boot of the car, which is the back part of the car where you can't see it, and then drive across the border into the UK and sell cigarettes in the UK, which is obviously illegal, but they avoided paying the excise duty on tobacco in the UK. There's another kind of tax which is connected to the environment. There's a carbon tax or emissions tax, mainly paid by big industry. I don't know if people, consumers, the normal person in the street would pay an emission tax, although in some cities you're paying a kind of tax just to drive into the city. I think there's one applied in Paris, isn't there, Reza? And then there's the London waiting to drive into to London, to central London. So you're paying an emissions tax to try and prevent so many cars going into the centre of the city.
What do you think about emission taxes charged to individuals for driving into big cities?
I think it's a good idea if the city is very congested and there's lots of air pollution, then that's helping to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the air, because people are more likely to take public transport, the train, the bus, reducing emissions because they don't want to spend the money to pay for their private car to go into the centre of the city. What do you think?
I agree. I completely agree. And another tax which you have to pay if you drive is vehicle registration tax. Simply because you have a vehicle, a car, a motorbike, etc., you have to pay a tax every year just for having it, whether you use it or not. Could we say, Craig, is this the same as what many people in the UK call road tax?
Yes, that's the same. So you're taxed just because you're driving the car on the road. And I think that helps to pay for the roads, keeping them in good condition, street lights, traffic lights, those kind of things. There's also another tax that's usually applied to tourists, and I've experienced this once or twice. It's a local business tax, and it's especially or specifically applied to hotels. I remember staying in a Scandinavian country, I think it was Denmark, where I had to pay an extra charge in addition to the hotel room charge, which was a local tourist tax. Has that happened to you?
Yes, it happened to me when I was in Albania. It's strangely in some places, but not all places. And probably completely coincidentally, it didn't seem to apply if you paid in cash.
Oh, really?
But did if you paid in card. I'm sure that's a coincidence.
Interesting.
Apparently, you're supposed to pay it all the time, but I wasn't charged it all the time.
Yeah, because the cash probably went under the table into their pocket.
Who knows? I know that there's definitely one place in Spain where you have to pay it as well, and that is in the Balearic Islands. Mallorca, Menorca, etc. You have to pay for every night you stay in a hotel there, a tourist tax.
Let's take a quick break here because I know you listen to this podcast to take your English to the next level. But what about your speaking? Is your fluency improving? Are you happy with your speaking skills? My conversation course focuses on making you a more confident and more fluent English speaker. You'll join me and a small group of motivated students, and we'll meet on Zoom and have topical discussions, role plays, debates, and presentations that will expand your vocabulary and help you express yourself effectively in English. So be proactive and take the first step towards becoming a confident and fluent English speaker. Send me an email today to craig@inglespodcast.com and I'll send you details of the next online conversation course. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the podcast.
So those are the more common taxes that people have to pay. I suppose we should give some kind of disclaimer here to say that we are not tax experts. We're just trying to help you with your vocabulary. So please don't send us emails asking us to explain these taxes and if you should or shouldn't be paying them. We're just helping you with your English here.
Yes, please don't base your tax payment arrangements on this podcast because I imagine you will probably end up in prison.
If you get audited by the tax office, then don't say, hey, Craig and Reza told us this. So yeah, we're not experts. Let's look at some more vocabulary connected to taxes and tariffs. Every year, as Reza mentioned before, here in Spain, we have to do our taxes. The idea of doing taxes in the UK or filing your taxes in the US means that you submit a tax return. So you calculate and explain the tax that you've paid. The money you've earned every year, all these different taxes, and you submit that tax return to the tax office, and then they calculate how much tax you need to pay.
Now, presumably you're going to do that legally and you're going to put the figures and the facts correctly to the best of your knowledge. But believe it or not, listeners, there are some people out there who don't.
No,
it can't be true.
I can't believe there's gambling going on here.
There are people who cook the books. Don't worry, they don't bring books into a kitchen. No, it's not that. It's an idiomatic expression, to cook the books, which means to alter a company's true figures illegally. for financial purposes. So if you want to avoid paying tax or something similar, you might illegally cook the books.
And it might happen that you pay too much tax for whatever reason. And if you do pay too much tax to the tax authorities, you need to ask for a tax rebate, REBATE. A tax rebate means that the tax office give money back to you because you have overpaid. You've paid too much. So a tax rebate or a tax refund is a lovely present to have because the tax authority, the government, gives money back to you because you paid too much.
Tax relief is not when you go, oh, thank goodness, all my taxes paid.
I'm relieved.
You may be relieved, but that's not the true meaning of the collocation. Tax relief, RELIEF, it means a reduction in tax owed, often for specific expenses. So tax relief is when you don't have to pay quite so much tax because of certain expenses, certain costs you've had to pay.
And those specific expenses could include, for example, if you give money to charity, that's exempt from taxes, or maybe you've made some pension contributions that are not taxed, or some work expenses. You've done a business trip and you claim the money because that shouldn't be taxed if you have your own business, those kind of things.
The next expression we've got for you, well, actually two expressions which often go together and get confused are tax evasion and tax avoidance. Because very often the same person or company will use both, but they don't, strictly speaking, mean exactly the same. Tax evasion is illegally avoiding tax. If you evade, EVADE, if you evade doing something, that means you avoid doing it, although you were supposed to do it.
So it's a crime.
It's a crime. It's illegal. Tax evasion is illegal. However, tax avoidance, as the name implies, is avoiding paying a lot of tax, not illegally, but thinking of ways, structuring your business, your finances in a way that allows you to pay the minimum amount of tax without doing anything illegal. So you might use loopholes. A loophole is a way of turning things to your advantage, but legally. It may seem very complicated what you're doing, but it is legal. And let's be honest, in the early 21st century, it's absolutely part and parcel of the strategy, the declared strategy of multinational companies. They might sell a product in country A, but it was manufactured in country B, but the headquarters for the company is in C, but their bank is in an island, which is country D.
Like having Google, for example, in Dublin,
Yes.
where the tax rate for businesses is very low.
Exactly. And they speak English. That's why they chose Dublin rather than London. That's the only reason. There's no other. If anybody thought it was because they really like the Irish, they are sorely mistaken.
There are two terms that you should know. One is gross income. The other is net income. The gross income, GROSS, is all of the money that comes in to you, your total income before tax. And net income is all of the money that you actually have in your hands after tax. So when they take the tax off, what's left, what you can actually spend, is your net income.
Not all of your gross income is taxable income. So the gross income, as Craig said, is the total, but there may be some of that total for which you don't have to pay tax on. So your taxable income is the income which is liable to tax, which may not be 100% of your income, because some things may be tax deductible. That means an expenditure, or that refers to an expenditure that can be deducted from total taxable income. For example, Craig, I have just done my tax declaration for Spain. I remembered at the last minute about a tax deductible element of my declaration. Do you know what it was? It only applies to one or two regions in Spain, but Comunidad Valenciana is one of it.
Is it something to do with podcasting?
No, if only it were. going to the gym.
Really?
Did you hear about that?
No? Tell me.
And it's retroactive. It's a new law, but it can go back to 2023. Money spent on going to a gym up to a maximum of, I think, 180 euros is tax deductible.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
In the Comunidad Valenciana since 2023.
That makes sense because if you're exercising and you're staying healthy, you're not putting pressure on the hospitals and social care and medical needs. Makes sense to me. Good idea. I mentioned audit before. That is something you really don't want or don't need in your life, an audit. That's when you are reviewed financially by the tax authorities. So you need to prove with documentation all of the money that you have earned or that has come into you. And also you need to show what you've spent and what you've shown on your tax declaration. So if a company or a private person is audited, then that means the tax office is looking at your income and your expenditure and making sure that everything is legal. And we could say above board. If something is above board, it's clean, it's legal, and you're okay.
The last expression we have for you about taxes is a trade war. So trade is buying and selling things between perhaps two countries. So a trade war is a situation in which countries, it could be two or more, try to damage each other's trading power by introducing high tariffs, for example. I don't want to get into details. All I'm going to say is it's May 2025. Google it if you're listening to this sometime in the future. A trade war is something which is very much being talked about at the moment, but it's something which nobody had imagined would happen for several decades until now.
And apart from hearing the words trade war in the news, if you're listening to the news in English, you'll probably hear the word tariffs quite a lot these days, because tariffs are certain kind of taxes that are placed on imported goods. In other words, any goods or products, anything that comes into the country from another country, there's a charge, an amount of money that the government applies on those goods and products. So in other words, imagine that we're here living in Spain and we want to buy a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Well, a Harley-Davidson motorcycle is not manufactured here in Spain. It's probably imported from the US. So there's an amount of money, you could say an import tax, a tariff that's applied to the Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and you have to pay extra for it if it's imported into Spain.
So, Craig, what's the purpose of imposing tariffs for imported goods from other countries?
Well, people say that it is revenue or money that comes into the government. So governments can make more money if they're charging a tax on goods that they're exporting. So in the short term, it could provide a lot of income, a lot of money coming into the country because people buying the products are paying more for them.
I suppose probably the most obvious advantage could be that it protects domestic industries because it makes imported goods coming from outside, more expensive. So if something's more expensive, you generally don't want to buy it unless it's a lot better. But if it's more or less the same as something which is equally good, and particularly if you want to support your local industry, you'll think, well, my own country's product and this imported product, they're more or less the same. The price is the same. I'll buy the one made in my country.
Well, yes, but let's say, for example, before a tariff is applied, you buy a football from China and it costs you €5, for example. Well, you can start making footballs in Spain or in any country, but because labor costs and other costs are higher in Europe, maybe it costs you €8 to make the football. So you're going to charge €10 for the football. So eventually, probably the consumer, the person, is going to pay more money for it because they can't bring the cost down enough and they can't manufacture the goods as cheaply as they can in other countries. So in the long term, prices will probably go up.
Yes. And of course, a more general justification behind using tariffs is the idea that you can influence trade policy and negotiations. As I say, let's not get into geopolitics, but it's May 2025. If you check out what was happening then as regards world trade, you'll see that a lot of important policy changes and negotiations were taking place, particularly between the two superpowers, China and America. So perhaps tariffs have been useful as a way of negotiating changes in the way they trade.
Or in other words, blackmail. Yeah. What's the difference, Reza, between tariffs and customs duties? Because we spoke about custom duties before, the money that's added as things are imported into the country.
Well, I really have to think about it. I guess a tariff usually simply refers to the rate of tax. So, for example, a certain country might impose, let's say, a 10% tariff on all goods imported from the United Kingdom into that country. Let's say it's the USA, for example. But they might impose a different tariff on, for example, China. They might make importers of Chinese goods pay 145% tariff. So you don't have to charge the same tariff to every country. It's the rate, it's the percentage. So then, Craig, what's customs duty?
Customs duty is very similar. Sometimes these two terms are used interchangeably, but customs duty refers to the actual tax paid on the thing that's imported, on the imported goods that come into the country.
Craig, some people argue that tariffs benefit domestic workers by protecting local industries, as we said earlier. Do you agree with that strategy?
Well, as I said before, maybe in the short term, but then you're going to have to pay domestic workers probably a higher rate, a bigger salary. So tariffs are often applied to balance trade deficits. If one country is earning a lot of money from tariffs and the other country isn't, so they're importing more goods than they're exporting, then that needs to be balanced a bit. So domestic workers, I don't know, maybe in the short term, but are companies going to start producing and manufacturing in the country, or are they going to look for alternatives that are cheaper? Because even though tariffs have been recently applied to China, I know that China have also set up factories in other countries like Vietnam or Laos or Cambodia, where tariffs are much lower. So they found a loophole, we had that word before, where companies in the US or in Europe can import goods from countries that are not China, but they are Chinese companies based there.
I don't think you're right there. The American government already knows about that, which is why they also put huge tariffs on Vietnam, Thailand, Bangladesh, etc. They specifically said it was to catch out Chinese companies, so they're on to them. It's no secret, I'm afraid. So for a couple of years, Chinese companies did get off with that, but I'm afraid the American government has caught them on.
They're on to them, are they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on, everybody knows that by far the most efficient electric car in the world is made in China. I can't remember the name of it now. It's 3 letters, the initials. It basically does just as good a job as Tesla's, but it costs a fraction of the price. And what a surprise, Donald Trump put a huge tariff on imported electric cars so that now they will cost more than a Tesla. But everybody knows they're just as good as Teslas. The Chinese are making electric cars much more efficiently than Elon Musk, and everybody knows that.
But what do you think? Do you agree with Reza that the Chinese electric car is better than a Tesla?
I said more efficient.
More efficient.
Not better, yeah, for the price. You get far more value for money.
Okay, well, let's see what the listeners think. And what are your views on tariffs and taxes in general? We'd love to hear from you on this topic. If you would like to send us a message that we will include in a future podcast, just go to speakpipe.com/inglespodcast and leave your message there. You have 90 seconds in which to leave your message.
If you want, you could write an email to craig@inglespodcast.com or belfastreza@gmail.com.
If you're a Spanish speaker and you want to improve your English with free and paid resources, visit the Mansion Inglés website at mansioningles.com. And for paid products, you can browse the online store at store.mansioningles.net.
As always, a huge thank you to all our Patreon supporters. That's Patreon. Patreon is a program in which you can donate money, if you like, to the podcast. And as a way of saying thank you to people who've donated the money, they get instant access to audio transcriptions. And also, as a more recent added bonus, they have the chance to sign up for free live Zoom chats with Craig so that they can practice their English a bit more. If you're interested, have a look at the link in the show notes. It's patreon.com/Ingles podcast.
We can't thank all of our Patreon supporters individually, there just isn't time, but we will say thank you to Javier Toro, who has kindly joined our Patreon program. Thank you, Javier, and thank you to everybody who is keeping this podcast going. We don't know what we're speaking about next week, do we, Reza?
Yes, but we rarely do know what we're speaking about, to be honest.
That's true, especially if we're talking about tax. But we will be back next Sunday, so please send us your ideas and suggestions for future topics. Until next time, thank you for listening. Have a wonderful week. It's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.